Good evening. I would like to call the March 1st, 2022 Planning Commission meeting to order. Please note that this meeting is being hosted through live stream on the city's website and by teleconference via Zoom. I would like to remind the Planning Commission to have their microphones turned on and positioned so that the audience can hear. Director King, may we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Hill,
Present.
Commissioner Beamsterfer,
Here.
Commissioner Lemke,
Present.
Vice Chair Van Arsdale,
Here.
and Chair Worth.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Please stand and join me for the invocation and flag salute. For the opportunity to come together and provide service to our community. I pray that you give us the wisdom to make the right decisions, and that you help everyone here make an environment where everyone can contribute and provide comment and be heard.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 4, approval of minutes. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions? Hearing none, entertain a motion.
Go ahead. I recommend that we approve the minutes of the Planning Commission for meeting February 1st, 2022.
Second.
Motion carries 4 with Commissioner Hill abstaining.
I was absent.
I understand. Yeah, thank you. Okay, item 5, public comment period. Public comment period is for items that are not on the agenda. Are there any members of the public present that would like to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? So, are there any members joining via interweb? It's actually teleconference or Zoom, but interweb's kind of the same thing.
Anybody joining via teleconference or Zoom that would like to comment? I don't see any comments, and I didn't receive any e-comments.
Okay, agenda item number 6 for Senate Bill SB 9, the 2-unit residential developments and urban lot split.
Thank you, Chair. The city attorney's office is currently working with staff to draft an SB 9 ordinance. The item before you tonight is just a receive and file. The purpose of the item is to give you an overview of the bill and to provide you with an opportunity to express concerns so that we can address those concerns where possible as we move forward with drafting the ordinance. As you already know, SB 9 is wildly controversial, especially among local governments. The California League of Cities was very vocal in their opposition to the bill, and over 240 cities wrote a letter to the governor asking him to veto it. Yet here we are. So I thought it may be helpful for us first to take a look at the evolution of the bill, just so we have a general understanding of how we got here. The bill can be traced to 2018 when Senator Scott Wiener of the San Francisco area proposed SB 827. SB 827 required relaxed development standards in areas near transit, and it required that cities allow up to 35 feet or up to 85 feet in building height, depending on a parcel's proximity to a major transit corridor. And in some instances, this meant that there'd be 5-story buildings on parcels, regardless of whether or not they were zoned for single-family residential use. So the bill died an early death. I think it maybe got through one hearing. And a lot of the resistance came from affordable housing advocates who thought that it was overly broad and would displace low-income residents and overburden low-income communities. So Wiener brought it back the next year as SB 50, which was a 2-year bill, and included provisions that required a certain number of affordable units in the projects. SB 50 failed. It got further in the process, but it failed largely because more affluent areas didn't like the affordability requirements. So at that point, the Senate created a working group to craft an alternative. And a lot of different bills came out of the working group. But one of the bills to emerge was SB 1120, which was from Senator Tony Adkins in the San Diego area. And SB 1120 allowed duplexes on single family residential parcels, and it allowed lot splits of single family residential parcels. So it was seen as a moderate or a modest alternative to Wiener's high density proposals, and it actually had bipartisan support. And really the only reason it failed is because they just ran out of time, and they were trying to make last minute changes, and they couldn't make the changes and take a vote prior to the midnight deadline. So Adkins brought it back the next year as SB 9 and included provisions aimed at addressing the concerns that were raised the prior legislative session. So now let's take a look at SB 9. So SB 9 states that a local agency must approve a 2-unit residential development or urban lot split ministerially without public hearing or discretionary review if certain statutory requirements are met. It also allows local agencies to pass ordinances granting longer map extensions. So what parcels are eligible for SB 9? So there's somewhat of a misconception that SB 9 is a free-for-all. It actually has a lot more site restrictions than our ADU law currently does. So for a property to be eligible for SB 9, it has to be zoned for single family residential use. It has to be in an urbanized area. It cannot be in a historic district. It cannot be a historic resource. And it can't be located in any of the sensitive areas set forth in the bill. And those include farmland, wetlands, high fire hazard severity zones, hazardous waste sites, earthquake fault zones, lands identified in conservation plans, habitat for protected species, land subject to conservation easement, regulatory floodways, and flood hazard areas. Additionally, a project will not be eligible for SB 9 if it requires the demolition of 25% of the existing structural walls of the property, or if it requires the demolition of a low-income unit, rent-controlled unit, or any unit that's been occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years. And that said, a project can require the demolition of 25% of the existing structural walls of a property if an ordinance allows it, or if that unit has not been previously occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years. And that wouldn't qualify for that exception because it's specific to tenant in the bill. And then this again went to address the concerns about a low income tenants being displaced. With regards to lot splits, SB 9 requires somewhat of an equal split. You can't do anything more than a 60-40, and each newly created parcel has to be at least 1,200 square feet. SB 9 cannot be used to split a property that was previously split by SB 9. And SB 9 cannot be used to split a property if the property owner previously split an adjacent parcel using SB 9. And lastly, an application may be denied if the building official finds that the project would have a specific adverse impact upon public health and safety or the physical environment, and that there's no feasible method to satisfactorily mitigate or avoid the specific adverse impact. So this standard is actually really difficult to meet. It's the same standard set forth in the Housing Accountability Act, which you can find at Government Code Section 65589.5. And essentially, it would require the building official to make a finding based on the preponderance of evidence that there's a significant, quantifiable, unavoidable, direct impact based on objective, identified, written public health and safety standards. So again, it's a very difficult standard to meet. So while it is in SB 9, as a practical matter, it's not going to be used much by agencies. So what standards can be applied to 2-unit residential developments? Generally speaking, a city may apply objective zoning, subdivision, and design review standards, so long as the application of those standards does not physically preclude either of the 2 units from being at least 800 square feet in floor area. That said, we can impose a 4-foot rear and side yard setback, even if it physically precludes either unit from being 800 square feet. We can also require a current percolation test if they're septic, and there's nothing in SB 9 that requires that we approve more than 2 units on a lot. So if an applicant uses SB 9 to split the lot, and then on one of the newly created parcels constructs the 2-unit residential development, the city does not have to approve ADUs on that lot. The city may not, however, impose more than a 4-foot rear and side yard setback. We can only require 1 parking space per unit, and we cannot require any parking if the project is within a 1/2 mile of transit.
No parking at all.
No parking at all.
Transit, is that considered the bus stop on Florida Avenue?
Yeah, that has a specific definition set forth, I think, in the Public Resources Code. And so it's defined by statute, but it's fairly specific.
Can you go back to the septic situation? If it's a single family lot and you're duplexing it and it's on septic with the drain system, how does that work? I mean,
If it's not on septic,
if it is it exempt because of that? Is that what you said?
no, we can require a current percolation test for those parcels that are on septic. Otherwise, I mean, the unit's gonna be subject to the same standards that any other single family dwelling would be subject to. They have to show adequate utility service. So for urban lot splits, the city can require utility easements. We can require that each newly created parcel has access to the public right-of-way, but we cannot require that they dedicate right-of-way or construct off-site improvements.
We have a minimum size lot. 6,000 square foot lot. 6,000 square foot. The minimum square feet has to be.
Yes, and it has to be at least 40% of the original lot. So if it's a 10,000 square foot lot, then you're gonna get 2 parcels. The smallest you can get is the 4,000 newly created parcel, 4,000 square foot lot. SB 9 also requires that the city ensure that the newly created lots and units are used only for residential use and they're not used for short-term rentals. It also requires that we obtain a signed written affidavit from the urban lot split applicant stating that they intend to occupy one of the housing units as their primary dwelling for at least the next 3 years. We're explicitly prohibited from imposing additional owner occupancy requirements on urban lot splits, but the bill doesn't have an explicit prohibition for 2-unit residential developments. So as the law currently sits, we can impose owner occupancy covenants on 2-unit residential developments, at least until a cleanup bill comes from the state and tells us that we can't.
Mentioned 3 years of occupying that. What's the percentage of occupation of those? In case they're like snowbirds or they have another house and they come in there, they're technically occupying it, but don't live there all the time.
And that seems like it would be a detail we could address in whatever affidavit, because we're going to have to come up with forms and checklists that we process over the counter from people. So if that's a concern of the commission where we want to be specific with regards to their continued use, we can make sure we address that concern in the documents.
Snowbirds that we have that often come to him, when they own a property, the property is still theirs. They just don't rent it out to anybody else. They just keep it and they stay in it 6 months out of the year. Is that what you're?
That's what I'm referring, and that's one example of like a snowbird or somebody that can occupy it but live in another town and not be there all the time. They just come when they want to come. But I can see them using it as a business investment, but not necessarily living there, but say it's their place of living so that they can get away with it.
And they wouldn't be able to use it as a short-term rental, but I mean, they could have a short-term, I guess, we'd be worried about a short-term lease in that
Well,
period.
short-term lease or
Okay.
just saying, like, when you specify somebody is like occupied, they have to occupy it for 3 years. Is that a full-time occupation? Like they can maintain the property, maintain the place that they're at, or even snowbirds that come and go, this technically it is theirs and that would be okay. A snowbird would be
Always
okay.
kept up nicely.
Correct.
I
But if
guess-
somebody uses it as like an investment, technically they occupy it if they're living there, but they're not necessarily there full time to be there on the property and make sure it's okay. And that's what I'm referring to.
No, I think that's a great point, is that because the intent of that is that if you're going to split your lot, you want to have some ownership in the next lot that's there, and you want to make sure it's taken care of. And so if someone owns it, but they don't, live there, it's just they own multiple houses, what's the definition of living there for 3 years? So that could be something that we, that could be something. And I just want to remind the commission that when you're talking, to make sure that you're talking into the mic and that the mic is turned on. I know it's kind of, they need to come back out a little bit further. But so that may be some clarification that we could work through on the affidavit that someone would have to sign to meet the intent of, we want, if you're going to do this, we want you there because we want you to have some ownership and some accountability in regards to making sure that it's taken care of.
I appreciate that feedback. We'll try to address that concern when we're putting everything together. So what site development standards can we include in our ordinance? As we discussed, we are limited by SB 9, but we're also limited by the Housing Crisis Act of 2019, which is SB 330. It was amended by SB 8 this last session. And the Housing Crisis Act prohibits us from imposing subjective standards, and it prohibits us from imposing any standards that would reduce the intensity of use on those residential parcels. So examples of that would be reductions in height, lot coverage, or floor area ratios, and increases in open space requirements. So that's all I have for you guys. If we can see if we have any public comment, and then we can open it up for further discussion and questions.
Sure. Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and open up public comment. Is there anyone that's present that would like to speak to this? Is there anybody online, or have you received any e-comments?
I have no e-comments. Is there anyone on Zoom or calling in that would like to comment? I don't see anyone raising their hand.
Okay, thank you. We'll close public hearing. All right. Thoughts?
So what is a good example of somebody actually doing this? I mean, I own,
9.
yeah. I mean, I have my own residence here. Are you saying that I could do it to my own residence?
If your residence meets the eligibility criteria in the bill, then yes.
And that's what I was getting at.
Yes.
Wow. So, okay, let me take it a step further. I have 4.5 acres on my property. So we're just talking about duplexes here, right? 2-unit residential.
Right. 2-unit residential developments are just 2 units, either 2 new units or 1 new and one existing, and they can be attached or detached.
Okay. So could somebody just go crazy with parsing out their property and
The one lot, one split rule sort of restricts people to just the two parcels out of one. The intent of the bill was to just get people up to 4 units out of a lot. We already have ADU law that allows people basically to get 3 units out of a lot. You can have a primary dwelling, an ADU, and a JADU. And SB 9 just gives people a little bit more. So instead of those 3 units, you can split your lot and get 2 units on each lot.
wow.
Does that conflict with resident? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are certain residential zones that have minimum square foot lots. So if he's like, for example, he's in a 4.5 acre, he's in a different residential compared to the McSweeney's or somebody that has smaller residential lots. Would that be a conflict to him to try to split it because maybe the lots become smaller than what is zoned for, or it would be denied because of that?
So just so I understand what your question is, he can split the lot even though it results in parcels that are smaller than what the zoning code would otherwise allow?
Correct. So like McSweeney's has a minimum lot size or R1, or in other extended areas, they have other larger lot sizes in a different residential category. So would it be denied in this SB 9 proposal? Would it be denied if the minimum lot becomes too small for that zone?
No, so someone's eligible for the lot split if those 2 newly created parcels are at least 1,200 square feet. And that's regardless of what the zoning code requires as the standard minimum lot size.
Essentially have made all residential lots R3, like an R3 status, basically.
But there's so many, like you can't demolition more than 25%. You can't. So I mean, there is criteria that will maintain, all of us trying to add an ADU for a parent or for our children or for.
If you take that McSweeney example, a 5,500 square foot lot, you would have to have 40% of that minimum. And, the existing houses and lots on that, there's no way to do that.
So it's splitting the lot is the, because, like what you're talking about, we used to call granny flats.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's, so you add an accessory building on your property, the way it's zoned and the way it is. What this is it's actually dividing the parcels so that they're individually owned. They can be owned by 3 separate people or 2 separate people instead of a duplex type dwelling on the lot. It's split, so you have 2 separate owners.
Correct. So there's separate conveyance. Someone can separately convey those units, whereas ADU law, you can, absent some exception.
So to that point, so if someone uses SB 9 to split a lot, the one parcel number becomes 2 parcel numbers, and then there's a separate tax assessment for the separate parcel as well.
There should be. There's a lot of details that haven't been, I don't want to say worked out, but we don't know what it's going to look like exactly. That seems like that's how that would work out. But even something like a mortgage deed of trust, there's no established lending practices for SB 9 right now, so it's not clear how that would work.
Right.
So a lot of this stuff, the pieces will fall into place in the upcoming year. When the ADU laws went into effect, it took a while for it to sort of catch on. So we're kind of still digesting what it will look like.
Well, that would be one thing I think that we would want to focus in on is the ability to assess taxes on subsequent APNs, so that if the city receives revenue from property tax, and if we're splitting a parcel into 2 different residences, then we are in effect providing services to 2 separate houses, and therefore we should be collecting taxes to pay for our services for those two separate.
I'm sure
Parcels.
that they wouldn't let that go by.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what that's what you guys,
I mean, even
while
though you
guys were
haven't-
talking, that's one of the things that's not fleshed
Not
out yet.
clear, is it, it's so, they're going to,
It makes sense that would happen where there'd be the separate assessment. But I mean, we haven't gotten any details about the process for that.
because like if he divided his 4.5 acres to two 2-acre parcels and then sold off one and they built, that's basically what you're doing, only with much smaller lots. And you're basically allowing neighborhoods to double in population. You know, my cul-de-sac could double in population without doing much at all, correct?
That's the intent of the bill, is just small scale residential development. It's very similar to ADUs. But there's an interesting study done by the Turner Center for Housing Policy. I think it's at UC Berkeley. And they looked at each city and how many parcels would be eligible for SB 9. And they looked at the feasibility of that. So in that study, there's a line for Hemet, and it'll tell you how many parcels are eligible.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So an accessory dwelling allows, like I said, the granny flats, the teenage, you know, the buildings that you have that are separate from your house. So that increases the population of that family, or sometimes they're not all families there. But this essentially increases the number of parcels up to, because we have about, what is our minimum square footage on R1 now? Used to be 5,000 square feet, 6,000.
Correct.
So essentially, and it has the other rules like you talked about, but it essentially could double, or even in some cases, the 7,200 square foot lots, perhaps could it triple? Just double.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about a 6,000 square foot lot with a 3,000 square foot house, you know and you have to have 40% of the lot in another lot to be able to do the split, and you have to have the 4-foot minimum setbacks. You know, that you would be hard pressed to take a housing tract and split a typical housing tract.
Calculate
Yeah.
in my head.
Right. No, I would think that those would, and I if maybe we, as part of this, we can send out a link to that study and just so we can kind of look through that. But it certainly seems like the majority of lots, specifically in master plan housing tract types of communities, are not going to meet the criteria in any way in order to be able to split. Where we have the opportunity is more the older neighborhoods where we have half-acre lots, or something to that effect, where you could potentially have a large enough lot remainder from the original that still is that's minimum 40%, maintains 4-foot setbacks, and has you the ability to have a minimum, correct me if I'm wrong, a minimum of 800 square foot structure. Is that the minimum?
Yeah, we can apply our objective standards, but if it physically precludes them from having two 800 square feet for the units, then we can impose those requirements. So they're entitled to an 800 square foot unit and at least an 800 square foot unit. So two 800 square foot units.
But we can apply the 4-foot separation, the 4-foot setbacks.
Yes, so we could
And
apply
the
that even if
40%
it,
minimum. And so with those two things, 40% minimum and a 4-foot setback, there's a 800 square foot minimum.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I mean, to me, without doing the math and whatnot, it seems like that precludes, and correct me if I'm wrong from your assessment, that precludes the vast majority of any housing tract, 7,200 square foot lot or less. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, Chair. And I would like to also kind of point out that, as you mentioned, these would probably apply more towards the older lots And some of the older lots you'll notice are kind of narrow but deep. So what you may find is that rear half of the property may become the quote, the split. And what we then would create would be flag lots. So you would have a long driveway accessing the rear half of the property, and then they can create their own. So if, let's say the lot is 50 feet wide, we're not splitting it down 50 feet, 25 feet, 25 feet with a 20-foot drive aisles on each property. You just won't have anything. So those, what we're envisioning is that these lots that are created narrow, 50 feet wide, but it's 200 feet deep, then you may end up with a property in the back of the property and a property in the front of the property, creating that duplex situation.
So those are two different parcels. So you can dictate that they both have to be owner occupied for 3 years?
Main house, the main.
The original.
Right, so it would be the applicant for the 2-unit residential development, recording an owner occupancy covenant saying they're gonna reside in one of the units.
So they could be doing this just so they could build a rental on the back parcel.
Right.
And then down the road, they could sell that back parcel off.
If they did the lot split, they'd be able to sell that back parcel.
Or they would be able to sell that back parcel off right from the beginning then.
You can't separately convey the units if they're on the same lot.
But if these are dividing, they're doing parcel splits.
Oh, if one's on each parcel?
Right.
Yes.
So that person that's buying in the back, can we restrict that to be an owner occupied for 3 years?
So if I'm understanding your scenario, it would be one house on each lot. And we would want the owner occupancy covenant to also carry over to that second lot. Okay. We
Or
could
don't
do
you
that.
think That gives you a better
I can-
stability in a neighborhood.
But if that, but the, so if you have a large lot and you do this split to say, find a place for mom or grandma or whatever to live for a while, and you do the parcel split per SB9 and you are living in the front house, you sign the affidavit saying that you'll be there for 3 years owner occupied. Are you suggesting that the back house, whoever lives there has to own it? What if you still own that and
Well,
you're
if
just
you-
letting your
If you're,
grandma?
if you're gonna build an additional unit and it's gonna be for family, why would you go through the trouble of making it a separate lot? Why don't you keep it the same lot and build an accessory dwelling unit? So you're adding, because you have pretty much similar parameters as far as size for the ADUs. So if you do that, then they wouldn't do the lot split, they would just do an
Well,
ADU.
I can tell you from my experience, I would prefer to do the lot split because I did it. I did an ADU and I had to utilize existing services from water and power to support the ADU. And in this case, I would be able to provide a separate power and water to the unit and not have to serve both houses off of a single 200 amp service. So from my perspective, if I was doing this, I would much prefer, well, which I did do this, but I would much have been able to split the lots and get a separate Edison service and a separate water service and have that separate so that I have my bill, my water, my sewer, and then my grandma and grandpa who lived there for 8 years, they can have their own bill because they kept the air conditioner on all the time, with the doors open and the dogs walk in. Anyways, I mean, I'm sorry.
Did you talk to them about saving energy?
I did, but it didn't matter because little Maisie was like this big and she didn't know how to use the dog door that I
Oh,
installed.
my goodness.
That's, but the
Okay.
point being is that it seems to me that if the point is to facilitate construction of another facility or another residence, that the full parcel split is if it's done right, if you have 2 nice homes, the parcel split in 2 separate APNs for each parcel, 2 separate services. That's another question I had in regards to servicing requirements for water and sewer, because that's a whole nother thing relative to planning out how you manage.
Yeah,
But,
because on ADUs, aren't they allowed to have separate meters?
They can if they're above a certain
The,
size.
the, well, when I did mine, Edison did not allow a separate meter unless you had a separate address, and you cannot get a separate address without a separate APN. So it was the insane and same thing. You could get a separate water meter, but it had to be as designated as a separate type of a use. So you could have a domestic use and then you could have a landscape use or something along those lines.
And that's puzzling to me because duplexes, we have some like right down off of Palm and Mayberry, south of Acacia. Those are duplexes. And they're on one parcel. They had two separate addresses, separate meters. Everybody in duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes have separate meters, separate everything,
Yeah, and I'm not sure.
separate water bills,
I-
separate everything.
I think
So that's something maybe we need to have some answers on.
I mean, I think, to your original question, though, is if, in terms of the owner occupied requirement. So if the question is, what provisions can we put in place, or what requirements through the affidavit can we put in place to ensure that the second unit that's created, someone that's there is got some ownership.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because again, what we're imposing, or they have imposed this on, are single-family residential neighborhoods. And those single-family residential neighborhoods were built for that intent, and your neighbors have all bought with that intent. And now we're setting up multifamily in single-family neighborhoods.
A point of clarification, there's two different things that we're talking about, and they're kind of getting conflated. There's the owner occupancy affidavit from urban lot split applicants that the statute requires that we obtain. And the statute explicitly says we can't impose any additional owner occupancy requirements on lot splits, but it's silent with regards to the owner occupancy requirements for 2-unit residential developments. So what we would do to address your concern would be to craft some additional provisions to include in the owner occupancy covenant for an applicant for a 2-unit residential development. So we'd have to work on that to see if we could address that concern.
Yeah, it would be, I'd be interested in how that's playing out in cities across California that oppose this in the first place.
Another difficult part of this is that HCD, first of all, the law is very confusing the way it's written. And HCD was supposed to come up with guidelines to give some clarification on a lot of sticky parts of the bill. And we haven't gotten those guidelines yet. So we're kind of waiting for further direction on some of the items. That's why a lot of the stuff you asked, we'll see.
So the law went into effect when?
January 1st.
January 1st, and HCD still hasn't provided you with implementing guidelines.
Correct. And I think it was passed in September.
So one of the things on that note that I think is very important that we address, and that we are in concert with utility agencies, are the ability to charge applicable fees for service for a subsequent APN. So, if you look at it from a infrastructure perspective, you're building infrastructure to support a certain number of people. And if you split a parcel, you're doubling the number of beneficiaries to that infrastructure. And if we are not allowed to collect the funding.
If you're referring to impact fees for utilities and
connection fees, capacity fees.
So as I understand it, SB 9 units are subject to those additional fees. That's in contrast to ADUs, that if they're under 750 square feet, an ADU isn't subject to those fees. And with SB 9, there's no no square footage cap. They're all going to be subject to those same fees that would otherwise apply to single family residents.
I just kind of in a general sense, whether it be a property tax assessment or anything else, is the concentration of communities results in a higher level of service requirements for those communities. And we need to make sure that the funding mechanism and the revenue streams are sufficient to support those future needs.
To your knowledge, has EMWD addressed what this kind of impact would be with SB 9?
It just, the first one came through the door about a month ago, and it's high on the radar. So no, we have not addressed it from a policy perspective or a board perspective, but it's raising a lot of these similar questions in regards to how we charge for connection fees and get the revenue stream to support, you know, the increased demand on our system. So I think the more consistent we can be in between land use agencies and utility agencies, the better it's going to be.
Now, another question, which this came up big time. School district conceivably have a really big impact. The fee that, well, if you double the size of a neighborhood, or, you know, even increase it by 50%, that is major impact if that includes children, which you're not going to restrict it unless you're in an age restricted area that qualifies. So you could essentially have a big impact on the school district. I'd be interested to know what they're thinking, and I'll ask.
But I think that goes kind of back to that. We all need to be on the same page, schools, utilities, land use agencies, because this is going to impact everything that we, you know, all of the services that we provide. So
yeah, you've built to a capacity that you can handle for sewer, and that's one thing that they can't do without is sewer and water. They might try to in Southern California get by without electricity or something else, but sewer and water are definitely needed, and you've built to a certain capacity.
Real quick clarification on historical area. Would like the homes on Harvard Street be considered historical area because they are on bigger lots that are deep, as you were describing?
Well, the definition of historical building is any structure that's 50 years and older.
50 years and older?
Mm-hmm. And so we would have to make a certain policy decision on what areas would be protected, because not all homes that are 50 years and older would be historical in nature. They may be old, but they may not be historical in nature. So we would have to make some parameters that would fit whether those certain structures are classified under the historical component that you need to either save or to minimize the impact of those buildings.
Couldn't just blanket say, okay, 50 years and older, you don't qualify, but everything newer does. You couldn't just blanket it. You would have to say other significant.
You could create an area like downtown area that have, because 50 years is now 1972 and older. So there are a lot of structures that have been built in those timeframes. So
a lot of houses are 50 years and older.
Population was about, yeah, sure.
yeah, my house was built in 73, so next year it. One more question that I have. If a parcel has gone through the ADU process and now wants to utilize SB 9 to split the parcel, is that so they already have an ADU that's its own unit? Can you use SB 9 to split that into two separate parcels?
So there's two different ways that this could go. You could have someone who's trying to split so that the ADU and the primary are on separate parcels. That would be a conveyance. They can't be separately conveyed. So that would be a lot split that would not be permissible because an ADU cannot be conveyed separately from the primary residence. But you could also have someone have a primary and an ADU and split the lot where that second lot is completely vacant, and that would be okay. So where you're gonna run into an issue is if you try to split the lot so that the ADU is on a separate parcel from the primary residence. Unless there's some mechanism created by a local agency to allow people to convert that ADU to an SB9 unit, that ADU cannot be split, separated from the main residence. That they can put them on one lot or the other lot, but they have to be together. If that makes sense.
That was a little bit of a personal question.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or comments on this?
You're right. I don't like it.
Well, I mean, my general thought is that the restrictions should, and I'm really interested to see what that report says and to see like what that means for Hemet, doing a really thorough assessment of our lots. But what does that in application, 40% minimum, 4-foot setback, all those base things that we can enforce as a land use agency, who does that preclude? And I would venture to guess that that's going to preclude all housing tracts, all master plan housing tracts. I would like to know if it doesn't, for sure, because that's kind of when you start getting into more of an issue, like what you're talking to. But if you drive down Stetson Avenue or something where, where, like you say, you have those long lots and there's a house in the front with the driveway and you could easily make a flag lot. I could see that being as a benefit. So what I don't like about it in general is just the state coming down and saying thou shalt ministerially with no public review. That I think is something just as the city, but
Exactly.
Probably have access to, like I get on Chicago Title and take a look at parcels, houses and parcels and stuff. I was trying to interpret this and think about that, like what you're saying, and just hover over the city because their maps are parceled. And I'm sure EMWD has maps that are parceled that you can access. And it was hard because there are, what we did historically was try to make more generous sized lots,
right.
especially when they had RVs and boats and toys.
Mhm.
So you tried to make them big enough to where they could be wide enough so that they could have a generous sized lot, they could do a pool, etc., but yet they could still be affordable. And so those 7,200 to 8,000 square foot lots, a lot of them are set to the side so that they can have that driveway access. So does that mean having that means they could stick a house in the back and parcel that off? And flag lots is one thing where it's long and deep, but these kind of, to me, it sounds like these kind of lot or neighborhoods that have these kind of lots would qualify to be able to do this.
Would we be able to get maybe some excerpts from that report to kind of say what this means to the city of Hemet and some examples?
Yes, there's a spreadsheet that they created that have all the cities listed, and we can provide that after the meeting too, just so you can digest the numbers. They looked, a lot of the stuff you mentioned sort of touches on whether or not the market would support splitting a lot. I mean, it's expensive to build these second units. So if someone's not necessarily gonna get a return on it because it's some dinky parcel like that you're referring to, where everything's kind of smashed together, they may be less likely to do it. This study looked at not just the build, but the market for these types of things.
That might be good to get some excerpts of that into the record. And so that we can have something, to kind of illustrate what this means to the community.
Yeah, we're going to be bringing this back, and when we bring it back, we'll include the additional information that you're requesting.
The only other thing is we need more parking. That's why. But okay, anything all done on this?
Your fees and for service and all that kind of stuff is important. But you also have things like your multi-species habitat conservation plan fees, your TUMP fees, DIF fees, TUMP fees, MSHCP fees, because they're not requiring or allowing you to require parking in some of the cases, but they still can impact all of these things. Are they going to be able to charge for those? Which we do it for the county, for TUMF and MSHCP and the others. So that's a question I think is really important too. And school fees, of course.
We'll include that in the report when we come back. I think all the fees would still apply in terms of process. I don't think we know what that's going to look like, but I'll follow up on that. And when we bring it back, I'll address that issue. No, you do not need a motion. If there's no more comments or questions, we can just move on.
Thank you.
Thank you for being patient with me.
No, that's thank you for the presentation and the staff report. I printed it out because I wanted to go through it a little bit more, because it does seem like it has a potential for a lot of discussion, both pro and against. So, okay, moving on to item 7A, conditional use permit for Dutch Brothers. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, commissioners, staff, and members of the public. I'm going to be presenting CUP 21-013, the Dutch Brothers Coffee Stand. The applicant is ADN Architects. The property owner is Granite Village West LP. The property location is the southeast corner of Florida and Sanderson Avenues within the West Village Shopping Center. The description is the construction and operation of an 871 square foot Dutch Brothers coffee stand with a double drive-through lane and a walk-up window. Here we have a site plan showing the location that Dutch Brothers will be leasing from the shopping center. This is the dental center, Jack in the Box, Florida, Sanderson Avenue. The general plan land use is community commercial. The zoning is C2, which is general commercial. Here we have a site plan showing the building. This is Florida, so vehicles can enter from Florida and join the queuing line. The queuing line has enough room for 23 vehicles. The location of the menu board, the escape lane, and what staff recommended as colored concrete to indicate to pedestrians of the oncoming vehicles or traffic. The parking that is for this location is located here and here, crash enclosure. This is a landscape area. This is a raised curb area. And these are just striping. Here we see the architecture and colors for the coffee stand. And here we have the colors for the body. This is towards the back where the siding is, and then the blue. We did ask Dutch Brothers to change from the Banff Springs Gray to the Mesquite, just so that it could coordinate better with the shopping center. And they did agree to that. On February 18th, 2022, the city gave public notice by advertising in the press enterprise and by mailing to property owners and tenants within a 500 feet of the project site prior to holding the public hearing at which the project could be considered by the Planning Commission. And to date, we have had no public comments received. This project is exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA Guidelines 15332 infill, and CEQA Guidelines 15303, which is new construction. And it is respectfully recommended that the Planning Commission adopt the Planning Commission resolution approving conditional use permit 21-013, subject to the findings and conditions of approval outlined in the staff report, and to direct staff to file a notice of exemption with the county clerk. I've included just a few photos just to get an idea of the location. This is facing north. This is the proposed location of the coffee stand. The overall view of the center looking south. And this is looking southeast. This concludes my presentation, and I can answer questions, and also the applicant is available on a conference call or Zoom connection.
Thank you, Salad. Any questions?
No.
I read through, I was trying to interpret those numbers, you know, when you had the queue, different cities and how they queue up and what to expect with the type of business. So they're queuing in, they're coming in and they're either turning left into the queuing or they're coming up from the shopping center and turning right into the queuing. If they're backed up, kind of like their neighbor down the street, In-N-Out Burger, if they're backing up past the beginning of the queuing, what are they looking at doing? Because it seems like they would be blocking an exit. Or
we did have that conversation with the applicant, and if that were the case, they do have employees who will direct so that that entrance is not blocked, and that could go into the area that is like towards Jack in the Box, that drive aisle that is adjacent, if it was required. The applicant is going to be present, I believe, and I think they could better explain how quickly they can serve. And that's one of the reasons for the express lane, so that the customers don't have to wait to get their order if the order is ready, and they can just exit and move that line quickly.
Kind of reminds me of Chick-fil-A when you go through one of their drive-throughs. They always have people out there, their
out there
tablets.
doing it. Well, I know In-N-Out has people out there, but they're still, but they're having to cook something, not like this. Into the route them into the back
They
area.
only have a single queue line too.
What's that?
They only have a single queue line too. It's not they don't have a double
Yeah.
line.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe that's.
I have,
If that person wanted to answer.
I have the applicant requesting to comment.
Okay, we'll open up public hearing in just one moment. Any other questions for staff?
No.
The only question I had for you was in regards to the applicant or they're going to be leasing the property. So how does that, for my edification, how does that work?
I believe probably the applicant can more
Okay.
fully.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and open up public hearing. And applicant, if you're on the phone, if you wouldn't mind just giving your name and address, if you don't mind, for the record.
Sure. My name is Kimberly Radin. Can you hear me? Just to make sure.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. My name is Kimberly Radin. My address is 1330 Olympic Boulevard in Santa Monica, California.
Thank you. Would you mind, I think you probably heard the discussion
Sure,
previously.
yeah,
addressing
about
both of-
the queuing.
Yes.
Yes, so Dutch Bros, they actually they have a very fast speed of service. They have dedicated employees that meet every morning just to discuss any potential traffic issues that may come up. So, like you were concerned about people potentially blocking any sort of drive aisle, they meet every single morning to make sure that they know where cars would potentially be queuing if they need to deal with that sort of an issue. We did have a queuing analysis done, and they did discover on certain other sites that on peak hours, you're usually only looking at about 14 cars in the stack. And we have well over that already. So if it were to become a spillover issue, they can have employees that would direct. But they also don't take orders in a typical fashion with a menu board. They have an employee, kind of the way that In-N-Out does, where they have someone that stands there with a iPad and takes an order. And then as Soledad mentioned, they actually, if you say there's someone 5 cars back in the row, if their coffee is already ready, they take and they will run your coffee out to you so that you can get out of line and go through that escape lane to keep cars moving as fast as possible.
That's spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah, they've cut it down. I think their goal is to get people like in and out of their line in, I think, 45 seconds or something, like from stopping to going. It's very, very fast.
Great.
I did see your, I saw where your average was 14.
Mhm.
And then I counted, I backed out in the diagram, the cars. So I that made me feel better. But I appreciate that they have other means to take care of the coffee rush times. So
Yes.
Great, thank you. Any questions, other questions for the applicant?
Well, your second question, right?
Yeah, she kind of answered it for me
Oh,
on
okay.
the side there. So thanks. Yeah, so that's anything else? Well, thank you for making yourself available and appreciate the interest in opening this up here in Hemet. So, are there any?
Yes. I like your name. It's like my name is Dutch too, but I'm pretty much a Heinz 57. Van Arsdale. But
Great.
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
Okay. Are there any other members of the public that would like to comment on this? Anybody online? Or any e-comments?
I did not receive any e-comments and I don't show anyone online requesting to speak.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for considering our project.
Close public hearing. Final thoughts, discussion. If none, here entertain a motion.
I would like to entertain a motion that the Planning Commission resolution approving conditional use permits 21-013, subject to the findings attachment number 1 in the conditions of approval exhibit 1A, and direct staff to file the notice of exemption with the state clearinghouse and county clerk.
I'll second.
Motion carries 5-0. Welcome to Hemet. Okay, moving on to item 7B, conditional use permit 21-003 and variance 22-001 for the APC cell tower. Soledad.
The applicant, yes, conditional use permit 21-003 and variance 22-001 for APC cell tower. The applicant is APC Towers. The property owner is HCP Properties. The location is 2850 West Florida Avenue. And this is a wireless telecommunications facility consisting of a 69-foot tall mono-eucalyptus tree and a 622 square foot equipment enclosure. This project was heard by the Planning Commission on October 19th, 2021. During the course of the discussion, staff observed the project was not consistent with all aspects of Article 46 of the Wireless Telecommunication Facilities Code and required a revision to the site. The Planning Commission continued the project to November 2nd, 2021. And on November 2nd, the development discrepancies had not been worked out and the project was tabled. Since then, staff has worked with the applicant to resolve the discrepancies. Thus, a variance request has been included with this proposal, and the project has been renoticed. Here we see the general plan land use is community commercial. The zoning is C2. And here we have an aerial view of the site, Florida Avenue, El Pollo Loco, KFC, the bowling lanes, and this is where the skating rink is. The proposed location of the cell tower camouflaged as a eucalyptus tree, and the proposed location approximately of the enclosure. As we looked at the HEMIC Municipal Code, Section 90-1621, it says in B1B that a major facility should not be located within 200 feet of any property containing a residential use. And the definition, according to the code, of a wireless telecommunication facility, wireless facility, or facility means an antenna structure and any accessory structure or accessory equipment that is used in the connection of the provisions of the wireless telecommunication service. So based on the above, the faux eucalyptus tree, the cell tower, and the block wall enclosure should not be located within 200 feet of any property containing residential use. That is the reason why the applicant is requesting a variance. The applicant has stated that the cell tower with the antenna array is the main and most important part of the cell site. It is the only part of the cell site that transmits radio frequency outward to surrounding areas. The cell tower is the only part of the cell site that is subject to Federal Communication Commission's radio frequency safety emissions requirements. And further, the applicant states that it is not necessary or justifiable for the distance or separation requirements for the equipment enclosure, as the enclosure does not contain any antenna that transmit radio frequency signals and is not subject to the FCC's radio frequency safety emissions requirements. The applicant is requesting approval of a variance allowing the equipment enclosure to be closer than 200 feet from residential. And this is showing what is being proposed. The faux eucalyptus tree would be 200 feet. It would be approximately 230 feet from residential. The location of the enclosure from the north side of the enclosure to property lane would be approximately 143 linear feet. And from the north end to the actual residence would be approximately 172 linear feet. Not reaching the 200, obviously. And further, as we look at the development plans, we can see where the eucalyptus tree is located in reference to the building and the location of the enclosure. There's looking at a west elevation, and then the enclosure back here. Here is a site plan showing the proposed location of the enclosure, the proposed location of the eucalyptus tree. And then here are some simulations showing what the tree would look like, and then where the enclosure would look like. But this, of course, does not show the screening, which is being required, which would be vines growing around the enclosure to camouflage it or to screen it as required by the ordinance. Here's a different view. This is looking south from Rafferty. And this is the type of screening that the applicant is proposing. This is actually a trash enclosure, so that's not what the enclosure would look like. The enclosure would be similar in just that it would be a rectangle. It would have a lid that would be chain link so that it would not be, could not enter. But this is what they're proposing, some type of a vining plant that would camouflage the enclosure. The Hemet Municipal Code, section 90-1617-A says that a CUP is required for wireless telecommunication facilities, and it provides that the Planning Commission can review and impose conditions of approval, and the Planning Commission can approve, deny, or modify a conditional use permit. Property owners and tenants for a 500-foot radius were notified. The hearing was advertised in the Press Enterprise, and a 10-day hearing notice was mailed to property owners and tenants. The project is exempt from CEQA under section 15303, class 3, construction of small structures, and section 15301, existing facilities. It is respectfully recommended that the Planning Commission adopt Planning Commission Resolution approving variance 22-001 and conditional use permit 21-003, subject to the findings and conditions of approval outlined in the staff report, and direct staff to file a notice of exemption with the county clerk. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Sola. Any questions for staff?
Just when it said it did not comply when it came before us before, what were the things that it didn't comply with, or were you double checking some of these issues that she just talked about?
So as it described by Soledad, is that the description on our wireless facility also included the equipment rather than just the tower itself. So in this particular case, they had the tower and the equipment separated from one another. In a general sense, they would be together under one lease space. But because of that separation, the equipment portion did not meet the separation. So now we've brought it back with the variance. We had different options that we were looking at, but then we would have to go to a different property. There would be additional structure that would be placed in the middle of a parking lot. So we thought this would be the best stealth component that we can provide. And we were asking for that variance to reduce that separation for the equipment part only. The cell tower itself will be beyond 200 feet separation, but just the equipment component.
Right. And at the last, one of them, we had a resident that had concern, but maybe with the updated information, that's why we haven't heard and everything is fine. Or did you hear at any process from that resident or anyone
I
else?
haven't heard any further comments.
Okay, that
just
makes me feel
at
better
the
just
meeting.
because I know he was really concerned. But with the new information and how it was explained, I think makes more sense and put everybody at ease. That makes me feel better.
And I think too, my experience up at the Ramona Bowl, because there are cell towers there and the buildings, the accessory buildings that they have, there's no noise, there's no, there's nothing that bothers you, even though up there you can't be bothered too much because there's not residential, but I've been around them and it's very quiet and it wasn't.
So the location of the equipment, it's the same that was presented before. The only difference now is that we're just going through the variance process.
Yes.
So that 200-foot separation, like you mentioned, that's just really about things that emit RF, right? Is the process to go through variance and what the applicant has had to do, is that something that maybe we could address in the future with our code to say that, it's really focus the 200-foot on the RF transmitting component, because, if there is a situation like this that, we don't necessarily want to make the applicant go through the variance process.
Sure, Chair, if I may. This is one of the reasons that we brought this forward with the variance component, because this particular applicant needed to go through the process. And we are in the works of modifying that language so that it does provide a separation between the equipment itself and the RF tower itself as a two separate item, rather than combining it into a one wireless quote facility as a definition.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Based on observation, it's probably going to be a very dumb question, but they were referring to vines as a decor to hide the equipment. But on the picture of the map, there's no soil, there's no dirt, it's just concrete, and then there's the asphalt. So how are they using fake vines, or how are they?
There's going to be a border that goes around the enclosure. And I don't know if we can see it. I don't know how far it goes, but that landscape area does go further back. I haven't been to the site to know exactly how far back it goes, but that requirement is for the entire sides of the enclosure. And of course, they're going to require water, so that it requires irrigation. And those are things that we have discussed with the applicant.
And is that requirement for screening? Is that what's the intent? Is that for aesthetics on our end?
I believe so.
Correct. It is for aesthetics. It is also to cover up possible graffiti, for blank walls, things of that sort. The asphalt, to answer your question, Commissioner Weensterfer, is easily removed. They're about 3 to 4 inches, and they're soft, so they could easily cut that. It's not like concrete, so they could create a little planter box around the equipment wall to grow vegetation around it.
Yeah, I guess so. Then you would need a separate. Would that irrigation system be off of its own? Would it have to have its own irrigation system, or would it be tied into the parking lot?
Yeah, it would be a discussion between the renter and the landowner or the property owner to figure out how they want to do that. But they have multiple options, that they could have their own separate meter to do that, or they tie into the existing system.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like a lot right there. I can certainly see, certain areas for sure, but I don't know, it just seems like a lot of effort on the side of the building there, but
yeah,
I'll leave it at that.
Yep.
Nice of them to do it.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and open up public hearing. Is the applicant available, or is there anybody that would like to speak to this project?
I don't see anyone raising their hand online, and I did not receive any e-comments.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and close public hearing.
Correction, I do have somebody raising their hand.
Okay. If you would not mind, whoever would like to speak, give us your name and address if you'd like. And let us know.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is Greg Morad. I'm the applicant representative, planning consultant for APC Towers, the actual applicant. I'm based in San Diego. Our office is PlanCom Inc., 302 State Place, Escondido, California. I just wanted to say the applicant is in agreement with the very detailed and thorough staff report, as well as the conditions of approval. And I'm available if you have any questions. That's all I have.
Well, great. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Any questions for the applicant? Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and close public hearing. And if there's no other discussion, entertain a motion.
I recommend that we adopt Planning Commission resolution adopting findings. I'm sorry, I move I always say recommend. I move that we adopt Planning Commission resolution adopting findings and approving variance 22-001 and CUP 21-003, subject to the conditions of approval, attachment number 1 and exhibit 1A, and direct staff to file a notice of exemption with the county clerk for CEQA purposes.
Second.
So that movement passes 5-0.
Thank you.
All right. Item 8A, city attorney reports.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. 8B, community development reports.
Commissioner, if I could just kind of direct your attention back to item number 7A. There was a slight grammatical error on motion number 2 that says direct staff to file notice of exemption with the state clearinghouse and county clerk. It should be just to the county clerk. This is an exemption only. So
Okay.
if you don't have any other questions, we can go ahead and strike that portion.
Thank you. So noted. All right. Future agenda items. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to report on February 22nd?
I don't have anything major to report on that meeting.
Not that I'm trying to move through this or anything, but future agenda items.
Yes, we have listed a general plan amendment for, this is the VMT measure. So this is a vehicles miles travel. This is what we normally used in the past for level of service, which is you grade the intersection based on A, B, and C grades, how fast you can move through the intersection. Since then, the state has revamped that process, and we need to reevaluate how traffic moves through the city, and that's based on vehicles miles travel. So this is our criteria that we'll bring back forth, and we'll have further discussions on that. And we have several other projects that didn't get listed here. However, we have other exciting projects coming before you with lots of commercial and residential developments. We are going at a gangbusters rate.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. All right. And finally, planning commissioner reports.
Commissioner Hill,
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Commissioner Lemke,
I have nothing to report.
Commissioner Beamsterfer,
Nothing to report.
Vice Chair Van Arsdale,
Nothing to report.
and Chair Worth.
Nothing to report. Thank you. So with that, we will adjourn this meeting until March 15th at 6 p.m.
Thank you.